felt ill at ease among the crowd gathered around the grave. Dressed in black, I blended in effortlessly. One of the few things that required no effort. Funerals were something I typically avoided. The expectation of grief worn so openly unsettled me. Or perhaps it was the obligation to feign emotions in a manner deemed acceptable. And yet, I was here. We had known each other for years, though I would not have called us friends. Still, you had come to my mother's funeral, and I suppose that left me with a sense of duty to return the courtesy. The truth was, you were my only remaining connection to the Muggle world. A world I had abandoned long ago. The crowd gradually thinned as mourners murmured their condolences, each taking their turn to clasp your hand before retreating to their cars. I stood apart, a few meters away, my gaze wandering over the worn gravestones rather than meeting the eyes of those who might recognize me from my childhood. When everyone had left, you approached without hesitation, stepping beside me. "Thank you for coming," you said quietly, your eyes fixed on the graveyard ahead. I turned to look at you. Your eyes were swollen, rimmed with red, yet your voice betrayed none of it. "Of course, I'm sorry for your loss," I replied, though the words felt hollow. Comfort was not something I'd ever been adept at offering, and I despised how inadequate I sounded. Over the years, I had perfected the art of burying my emotions, an armor that had served me well. But in moments like this, when the weight of human connection pressed in, I found the mask more difficult to maintain. A flicker of a smile touched the corner of your mouth. "Thank you." A pause. Then, as if the thought had only just occurred to you, you asked, "Would you like a lift?" I hesitated. The instinctive refusal formed before I had fully considered it. "No, thank you, The words caught in my throat. I could hardly explain that I intended to vanish into thin air the moment I was alone. Even though you had long known what set me apart, I was not inclined to advertise the fact to others. You smirked knowingly. "Right." Without warning, you nudged me lightly with your elbow. I exhaled sharply, startled by the unexpected contact. The next words left my lips before I had time to analyze them. "If you need anything, or if you'd rather not be alone, come by later, for a glass of wine." You turned, studying me with quiet curiosity. I had expected a polite refusal. Instead, you nodded. A brief squeeze of my hand, fleeting yet deliberate. And then you were gone, walking toward your car. I remained for a moment longer, watching as you disappeared through the cemetery gates. Then, without another word, I sighed and apparated home. The next moment, I was standing in the dimly lit living room of my childhood home at Spinner's End. The familiar scent of aged wood and dust greeted me, a scent that had lingered long after my parents had gone. Though I spent most of my time at Hogwarts, I had never been able to part with this house. At first, it was grief that kept me tethered, an unwillingness to dismantle the remnants of my mother's life. Over time, it had simply become a place of retreat, a sanctuary of solitude where the world could be kept at bay. I shrugged off my coat, letting it fall carelessly over the arm of the worn-out chair, and dropped onto the sagging sofa. The springs groaned in protest, the sound oddly grounding. What in Merlin's name had just happened? Why had I invited you over? I exhaled sharply, rubbing my temples. Perhaps, hopefully, it had been mere politeness on your part, a way to avoid an awkward refusal. You would thank me again in passing the next time we met, saying something about how you had meant to come by, before trailing off into an excuse. That would be the end of it. And yet, the thought of sharing a glass, Perhaps an entire bottle of wine with you was not what unsettled me. I had always found your presence oddly tolerable, even pleasant in moments. But it had been years since we had last spoken. Time had stripped away the ease of youth, that peculiar naivety that had once bridged the chasm between our vastly different worlds. Now we were adults. You, a muggle, firmly rooted in a world I had long abandoned. I, so steeped in the shadows of the wizarding world that I doubted I could find common ground with you anymore. What would we talk about? You knew nothing of Hogwarts, nothing of the life I led beyond the veil of secrecy. And I, in turn, knew little of your world beyond the surface. The logical part of me knew this would lead nowhere. And yet, some absurd, foolish part of me had extended that invitation. I fixed my gaze on the clock perched on the mantel, just shy of 5 o'clock. You would still be entangled with funeral guests for at least another 3 hours. Plenty of time to brace myself for the inevitable, awkward silence that would settle between us like an unwanted spectre. With a flick of my wand, the fireplace roared to life, casting flickering shadows across the room. The warmth did little to ease the tension winding its way through my chest. I rose, making my way to the kitchen, retrieving a bottle of wine and 2 glasses. As I placed them on the small side table, I hesitated. A moment later, I picked up one of the glasses and carried it back to the kitchen. Better to assume you wouldn't come. When I returned, I exhaled slowly, as if I could will away the unease creeping through my thoughts. I had not known your mother well. In truth, I had not seen her in nearly 5 years. And yet her passing had unsettled something deep within me, something I had long since trained myself to suppress. Loss. It was an old wound, one I rarely allowed myself to acknowledge. The life I had chosen, or rather, the life that had been shaped by my choices, left little room for grief, for sentimentality. Dwelling on emotions was a luxury I could scarcely afford. The fire crackled softly, filling the room with its rhythmic murmuring, a quiet companion to my solitude. I leaned back into the worn fabric of the sofa, my fingers idly tracing the seam of the cushion as my mind wandered. The waiting was always the worst part, allowing thoughts to creep in unbidden and unwelcome. I had no idea whether you would actually come. I told myself it was of no consequence either way. And yet, a sliver of unease nestled itself beneath my ribs, pressing against something I preferred to ignore. It wasn't just you. It wasn't just this night. It was the past creeping in, as it always did when I allowed myself a moment of quiet. How many funerals had I attended over the years? Too many. The war had ensured that. Some had been small and quiet, others grand spectacles of mourning. Each time I had stood at the edges watching from the periphery, never quite part of the grief, yet never truly apart from it. Loss had long since woven itself into the fabric of my existence. I had made peace with it, or so I had told myself. And yet tonight, something was different. I let my head rest against the back of the sofa, closing my eyes briefly. Your mother had been kind to me once, a lifetime ago, when I was just a boy skulking around Spinner's End. She had let me sit at her kitchen table, had pressed a cup of tea into my hands without question. She hadn't pried, hadn't asked why I spent so much time away from home. Just a simple kindness, forgotten by most, but lodged somewhere in the recesses of my memory. I supposed that was why I had gone today, a repayment of a debt so small it should not have mattered. The clock ticked on, its steady rhythm pulling me back to the present. 5:30. Still early. I pushed myself upright, running a hand through my hair. The house felt stifling, too full of thoughts I didn't wish to entertain. I moved to the bookshelf, my fingers trailing along the worn spines of books I had collected over the years. Some I had read countless times, their pages filled with annotated notes in my sharp, slanted handwriting. Others I had kept simply for the comfort of their presence. I pulled one from the shelf, an old potions text I had studied as a boy. The corners were frayed, the pages brittle with age. Opening it, I found my own notes scrawled in the margins. Improvements, corrections. My own additions to spells and mixtures that had been deemed sufficient but never perfected. Even as a student, I had never been satisfied with simply accepting things as they were. I tried to focus on the words, on the formulas. But my mind refused to quiet. My fingers drummed against the cover before I snapped the book shut with an irritated sigh. Waiting had never suited me. I resolved to carry on with my evening as I would have if I hadn't been foolish enough to invite you over in the first place. Routine, after all, had a way of dulling unnecessary contemplation. The shower was scalding, the water pounding against my skin, washing away the remnants of the day's tension. I let it run over my face, closing my eyes as the heat drove away the lingering chill from the funeral. A few minutes passed before I finally began to feel like myself again. By the time I was seated in my armchair, a book in one hand and a glass of wine on the table beside me, I was certain I could have sent an entire class of first years scurrying with a single glare. I let the book pull me in, the familiar comfort of well-worn pages serving as a welcome distraction. So when the sudden knock echoed through the house, it nearly startled me. My head snapped up. For a long moment, I simply stared toward the door, half expecting the sound to have been some trick of my imagination. But then it came again. 3 short raps against the wood. You. I set the book down carefully, though my fingers lingered on the spine longer than necessary. The wineglass sat beside it, the deep red liquid swirling slightly as I stood. I made my way to the door, every step measured, controlled, as if that might somehow prepare me for whatever came next. And there you were, still in your black dress, the fabric clinging to you like the weight of the evening itself. Your coat was unbuttoned, and you shivered against the bite of the January air. Even in the dim light of the street lamp outside, I could see the exhaustion in your face, the way the day had drained the color from your features. "May I come in?" Your voice was quiet, uneven. You shifted on your feet, hands gripping the edges of your coat as if considering whether to rethink this decision entirely. I did not answer immediately. Instead, I took a step back, pushing the door open just enough for you to slip inside. You did not hesitate, brushing past me without a word, the fabric of your coat whispering against my hand.